In today's video, I'm going to share my competitive Necron list for 8th edition and how I made it. It's coming right up.
Necrons!
Nick speaking, and welcome to this video. Right, in today's Necron video, I'm going to share my Necron competitive list. I'm going to talk about how I got to the list and also how the list works on the table. I really hope you will enjoy the video. So first of all, why did I make a competitive list? Okay, so I had a game planned with Richard, a friend of mine, a friend of the channel. He's been on the channel before, he's a very good player, he likes to play in a more competitive environment and he goes to local tournaments. So for this game he asked me if I could make a competitive list for him to play against. He planned to play his Space Wolves and he wanted to test out some new ideas and a new list that he's been working on, and he wanted to test them out against something competitive. So that was my task, to make a competitive Necron list. Okay, so this is how I went about making my competitive list. I drew from my experience of playing with the Codex so far. Now, one thing which I've noticed is very powerful, especially what I would consider to be in that competitive environment, and that's the Sotek Dynasty. And the reason for that is the Warlord trait, which lets you regain the command points. Now, with a lot of command points in an army and all the fantastic stratagems that Necrons have, being able to regain those command points is very powerful. So that was my starting point. Now, to take full use of that Warlord trait, you need to get some command points in the army, and currently the best way to do that, for Necrons anyway, is going to be the Battalion detachment. That gives you 5 command points, plus the 3 from being battle forged. So that was going to be my next port of call, and I decided to go for the Mefret Dynasty. It's been working quite well for me. When you get into rapid fire range with Gauze Blasters, -3 AP on those Gauze Blasters is really nice. But I didn't stop there. I wanted to put my play style into the army as well, and that's generally more of an assault Necron army. So I've also gone for a Novok detachment, and that's going to be an Outrider detachment. So that was my starting point. I have 3 dynasties and 3 detachments. Yes, it's not particularly fluffy, however, I'm trying to pick the bones out of the Codex to get the best of the rules that are in there. Now we're going to talk more about the rules and the units and how the army works, but first of all let's have a look at the units I've selected. Now before we get into the list, if you would like to keep up to date with the wonders of Warhammer 40k, then please give me a sub and hit the bell button so you don't miss an upload. Okay, so let's start with the Sotek detachment. I've gone for a patrol detachment. No command points, but the smallest amount of investment in points to get that Warlord trait. For the Warlord, I've gone for a Cryptic. Now the Cryptic has the Staff of Light and Chronometron. He will be my Warlord with a Hyperlogical Strategist. That allows me on a 5+ to gain a command point every time I spend one. He does have an extra rule where he can re-roll 1 hit, wound or damage dice per battle. Now to fill out the patrol detachment, I've gone for 5 Immortals as the troops, and those Immortals are going to have Gauze weapons. Now the role of this little detachment is basically just to sit at the back of the field on an objective. The Cryptic will help with the RP rolls and also the 5+ invulnerable save of those Immortals camping on objective, hopefully in terrain for a 2+ cover save. I'm going to be able to regain command points. Now I am a little bit vulnerable to giving up Slay the Warlord with such a small unit and a basic HQ. However, with the rest of the army and how it's going to work, hopefully that won't be too much of a problem. Now I usually recommend taking Tesla guns when you're using 5 Immortals camping on a backfield objective. It gives you the longer range and more shots. However, I've gone for Gauze weapons in this case because of the Dynasty Code, which means I can move and advance and still shoot those guns, albeit as an Assault 1 weapon. But that is very nice to have as a little defensive role. If they do get into trouble, at least I know I can pull back or move away if needed. Now arguably I could make the Warlord a lot more survivable, maybe replace the Cryptic with Imitek the Stormlord. However, it's quite a number of extra points, and how I'm making the list. I'm trying to spread the points around in all the right places to get the most out of the codex. So let's have a look at the next detachment. That's my Mefrit Battalion. Okay, so my Battalion detachment, which gives me 5 command points, plus a 3 from being Battleforge, so I'm currently on 8 command points. Now, to fill out the 2 HQ slots in the battalion, I've gone for 2 Lords, and both of them are going to have war size. Now, potentially these Lords could be Cryptics to give me that 5+ invulnerable save and the bonus to RP. However, the Lords are a little bit cheaper, and to squeeze everything else that I needed into the army, I had to go for the Lord option. Now, the Lords have the buff where units around them are able to re-roll the wounds of a 1, so that is nice to have. And with the war size on them over the Cryptic Staff of Light, they are a little bit more threatening in close combat, which we talk about more in a minute when I've gone over the rest of the units in the army. Now, you need 3 troops in the battalion detachment, so I've gone for 3 squads of Immortals. Again, 5 Immortals with Gauls weapons. Now, these Gauls weapons, when they get at half range, bearing in mind they are rapid fire guns, will be -3 AP. Very nice indeed, plus I can re-roll the wounds of a 1 when the Lords are around them. Now, next in this detachment, I've got 5 death marks and some heavy support. I've got 3 heavy destroyers. That's going to be my main long-range anti-tank guns. Now, the way the 3 Immortal units and Lords are going to work is they are going to push forward towards the midfield area, try and take midfield objectives, get into range to take full advantage of the Mefrit Dynasty Code. Now, I won't be pushing these Immortals further than midfield. That is where they're going to stay. One of the units may possibly have to stay back in my deployment zone if I have 2 objectives in my deployment zone. But the general idea is they go to midfield, and then if needed they can backtrack, help out my warlord, take midfield objectives, lay down some extra shooting for the rest of the army to do what it needs to do. Make sure you watch to the end of the video, because I've already played this list and made 1 change. I think it's going to be a good change, so keep watching. Okay, so the heavy destroyers, not too much to say there. They're of course my long range anti-tank weapons. The army isn't about anti-tank, but it has a little bit of anti-tank in there with the destroyers and of course with the Gauls weapons. That long range strength 9 gun, very useful, and with all the command points that I'm going to have, I'm definitely going to use the extermination protocols on those heavy destroyers. Now, regarding the death marks, I've got just 5 death marks in the army. Now, one reason I've got the death marks is I had a few points left over. The other reason is they make a very nice little distraction unit, something to keep your opponent busy, something to play on the back of your opponent's mind, especially if they're going to deep strike themselves. Potentially you can intercept them. Now, in my experience, 5 death marks don't really kill much. You generally need a bigger unit, ideally 10. However, 5 can be a very good distraction, play with your opponent's mind, and potentially come in and grab some objective points on the turn that they do. It just gives my opponent something else to think about, and they will work really well with the rest of the army, which I'm going to talk about next. So that's my Novok detachment. Okay, so before I talk about the Novok detachment and share the units that I've got, I just want to go back to my initial list building. Now, when I'm looking at a competitive list or the best unit in the codex, for me the 2 units which stand out are the destroyers or the wraiths, and I think both of those units are very, very good. However, I went for wraiths, and the reason for that is I find they suit my playstyle a bit better than destroyers. Overall, with the 3+ invulnerable save, all of the wounds, the toughness, the speed, I actually think they're probably a more competitive unit than destroyers. Although, don't get me wrong, destroyers are very, very good, especially with the stratagems for all of those re-rolls when you're shooting. Okay, so I've talked about wraiths, so let's have a look at those first. So I've got 3 units of 5 wraiths. These are all base without any upgrades. As I said, they're very fast, they're very survivable, they are a little bit vulnerable to mortal wounds or to me rolling badly, but on the whole they are generally one of the most survivable units in the Necron Codex. Plus we can reanimate them using the stratagems. Now this detachment gives me an extra command point, so I've got 9 command points in total, and every time I use one on a 5+, I get those command points back. Being able to reanimate those wraiths, getting them back up with 3 wounds, really nice. 2 command points, but I've got a chance of getting those command points back. So I'm really liking the wraiths in this unit, and of course being the Novok dynasty means I'm going to be able to re-roll my hits in close combat. Now talking of dynasty codes, of course I could take the Nefric dynasty for those wraiths. That allows them to advance 6 inches and then use my stratagem where you can advance and assault. Now I can still use that stratagem, but of course I'm taking the chance of rolling for my advanced movement. However, I like the idea of being able to re-roll to hit in close combat. In my experience with wraiths, especially now, they have that -2 AP and 2 damage. You want to get as many hits, as many wounds through as possible. So being able to re-roll those hits is very powerful. And that's why I've chosen the Novok dynasty over the Nefric. Okay, so to back up my wraiths, I've got an elite choice, and of course I've gone for flayed ones. Now the flayed ones have the special rule of shred. That means in this dynasty they can re-roll their hits and wounds. They've got 1 less attack than they did in the index, however they are a bit cheaper. Now of course with the new FAQ, the flayed ones are going to have to wait until turn 2 to come down outside of my deployment zone. Now for me this isn't a problem. I still consider being able to automatically come down on turn 2 and to be able to assault a whole lot better than it was in 7th edition. So the changes really don't matter to me. I can just come in turn 2 and away I go, with the chance of assaulting or indeed to come down midfield with my immortals, taking objectives along with 3 squads of wraiths charging towards you. I think is going to be really distracting. Now the last thing that I need in my outrider detachment is a HQ. So Nick, what HQ have you chosen? Okay, so I know we're talking about competitive lists, and the unit that I've chosen most people are saying are not competitive. In actual fact they're saying he's not that great. However, A, I really like the model, and B, I think I can make him work in this list, and I've chosen the Destroyer Lord. Now my Destroyer Lord is going to have the Scythe and Phylactery, and because I've taken Phylactery on him I can exchange that for the artifact Nano Scarab Casket. This gives me a D3 living metal at the beginning of my turn and my opponent's turn. Not only that, when he dies for the first time he can come back on a 4+ with D6 amount of wounds. Now this is going to make the Destroyer Lord very survivable, and he's got his war side there in the Novok dynasty, so he can re-roll his hits in close combat. I think he's a great accomplice to the wraiths. He can stand behind the wraiths, not get shot at. When he gets in close he can go and attack an additional unit. So 3 squads of wraiths, a Destroyer Lord, the flayed ones and some death marks all coming into your deployment zone. In the midfield I'm going to have my 3 immortals and the 2 lords, and at the back of the army I'm going to have my heavy destroyers, the cryptic and his immortals. And that list there comes in at 1995 points, and as I said that's 9 command points. I think I've got a solid list there. I think I managed to pick the bones out of the codex and get the most out of every single point that I've got. However, I have played a game with this list, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, and I've made a change. Okay, so I've played this army, this list, just the once, but I've had to go with it. Now of course, playtesting is the ultimate tool for fine-tuning a list. It's all okay putting it down on paper, but until you've actually played that list with all the different missions against many different armies, that's when you can really fine-tune the list. Now my first game, straight away I came across an issue. Now I played Richard, one of my subscribers. Now he has his own YouTube channel, he's just started with it, so go and check it out just there. And we had a game, his Space Wolves against my new Necron list. It was a great game, lots of fun, and I did make a battle report. Now that battle report will be up this Sunday at 11 o'clock UK time, so stay tuned for that. Now during the game I actually made a mistake with the list, but that mistake actually highlighted a way that I could change the list and make it better. So let's have a look at that. Okay, so one thing about all of these dynasties, all of these detachments, is getting the units to work together. Now the mistake that I made is I had my heavy destroyers at the back near my cryptic, and I was using the cryptic to give me +1 RP to my heavy destroyers. Now the cryptic is from the Sotek dynasty and the destroyers are from the Mefrit dynasty, so I actually wasn't able to do that. But it did highlight the fact that my destroyers, because of their long range guns, are actually going to sit at the back of the list more, and if I can get them next to the cryptic and change those destroyers into Sotek destroyers, it means that I'm going to get that 4+ RP. So that is the change that I'm going to make. I'm going to move those heavy destroyers into the Sotek. Now it does mean that I will lose the extra -1 AP at half range, however they're still -4 AP, so even if you had a 2+ save, that goes up to a 6+ save. But what it does mean is I have the opportunity to advance and still shoot that gun as an assault gun. That means I've got a lot of movement on those heavy destroyers. If I get into trouble, maybe something's just deep striking in, they don't make the assault, I can move, I can advance, I can still shoot that gun. Plus, if I can keep them in range of the cryptic, I get the +1 RP and the 5+ invulnerable save on the destroyers, and that makes them a lot more survivable. So I think that is a good change. So I now have my list. This is my army in its full glory. I'd love to know what you think of my army. Now I'm not necessarily saying this is a tournament winning list, however I do believe it's a very competitive list for Necrons in 8th edition. Now if you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing, hit my icon at the end of the video so you can keep up to date with the wonders of Warhammer 40k. Beam me up!